Hey everybody, welcome back to the Dungeon Dive. Daniel here. I hope you're doing well, and if you're not, I hope you are soon. Okay, today on the Dungeon Dive, we will be reviewing League of Dungeoneers. I have spent a little over 2 weeks with this game. This has been the only game I've had set up for a couple of weeks plus. And so I think I'm in a good position to give you an informed opinion on League of Dungeoneers. This review will be a 12-point review. I will be covering 12 points about the game. And after we do that, I will be answering some specific questions from some Dungeon Dive patrons. I'm not going to be showing a lot of this game while I review it. I'll be flipping through a few things kind of randomly. If you want to see some more things in detail, watch my other videos in the League of Dungeoneers playlist, and I'll have a link to that in the description below. So as a broad overview, if you are just joining the world of League of Dungeoneers is a very prototypical dungeon crawl game. You might say that if you looked up dungeon crawl in the dictionary, it might show a picture of League of Dungeoneers. You will be taking a party of adventurers. You will be creating your party of adventurers, taking them on a quest across a big open world map, going on random quests, going into dungeons, which you will be exploring. There is real substantial exploration in the game. The dungeon is created by a deck of cards that you will draw, and then you will lay down tiles. You can choose which way to go. Sometimes your objective will be one way, sometimes it will be the other. In the rooms, you can search for treasure. There are traps. There's a lot of traps, a lot of locked doors, locked chests, and traps to avoid in the game. Lots of enemies. There are non-combat encounters and combat encounters. Basically, League of Dungeoneers has just about everything we look for in this kind of game. So that's kind of a broad overview. Now let's get into the 12-point review. Okay, so point number 1. League of Dungeoneers should quench the thirst of people asking for a Warhammer Quest 95 reprint. It has everything that game has and more. It has random dungeon exploration and creation. It has random quests. It has different settlements you can visit, non-combat things to do. It's a survival quest. The campaign is more focused on your characters surviving from one adventure to the next, getting stronger as they go. But there are also small little narrative campaigns to provide a kind of more in-depth story for people who want that. It has good loot. It has an extensive bestiary. It has companions that you can hire. It has good references. It has a big rule book with a lot of stuff in it. This is an epic game. If you want a huge epic dungeon crawl with an overland map that you can also explore, this is one of the most perfect games that I can recommend. However, it's not without its issues. The rule book and the cards and a lot of the documentation, all of that stuff has a lot of mistakes in it. The game has gone through a lot of revisions over the last year and a half or so. And as certain things have changed, maybe they've updated the rule in one place, but they haven't in the other. There are a lot of typos. And a lot of that stuff is unfortunate. There's no way to sugarcoat that. And it's not just typos. There are some pretty significant errors that do impact the gameplay. And I know a lot of people, when I'm critical of a game, they think I don't like it or they think I'm being too nitpicky. So I did want to point out some of the more serious things that you might have to deal with while you are learning the game. And these are all things that I have let Michael know. Other people are letting him know. And there is a pretty extensive errata and FAQ that will be available to everybody. So Michael is taking the steps to correct these issues, but it is unfortunate that they do exist. For instance, in some places in the rulebook, it says that it takes a dex test, a dexterity test to climb obstacles. Okay, it doesn't anymore. The line of sight penalty on all of the obstacle charts says it should be +10 on everything, but it should be -10 on everything. The rules for when enemies dispel magic is missing. Companions don't have a constitution stat, but the book says they do. The Armor of the Father legendary item is missing from the book, and this is a reward for one of your background quests. The warrior description says Berserker when it should say Barbarian. Armor with multiple locations. You only add encumbrance and durability once, and it only mentions that rule in the character creation example, not in the part of the book where it talks about armor or equipment. Stackable items must be mentioned on both. That's never mentioned. In the Bestiary, the Scurry rules, the Silent rules, the Perfect Hearing rules, and the Sneaky rules are all wrong in the Bestiary because the initiative rules have been updated, and that part of the Bestiary was not updated. And there are a few other things like that. It makes it a little difficult to learn the game because of the inconsistencies and because of the errors. And like I said, there's just no way to sugarcoat that. Hopefully these issues get solved in a second printing. Hopefully there's a way for us to get an updated materials, but Michael is taking care of that stuff in the errata. So you should be in good hands. It is just unfortunate. So number 3, there are diverse character builds with meaningful progression. Progression is based on XP and luck, and I really like that luck plays a factor in how you progress your character. For instance, if you ever roll a perfect roll, and that is a 1 to a 5, D100 Dungeon is a roll low system. It's a D100 system, so you're trying to roll low under a certain percentage. And if you ever roll a 1 to a 5, you get to add a bonus to your stat or to your skill that you were testing. That is super, super cool. So you can have these great moments in the middle of a dungeon where you might get to upgrade your combat or your dexterity. There are a lot of perks and talents to learn, and you can really focus on a build. For instance, one of the characters that I am building right now is a fire alchemist. I'm an alchemist, but I'm choosing to focus all on fire potions and that kind of thing. It's super, super cool. Okay, number 4, this could be a negative or a positive depending on how you feel, but you really do need to play with a full party of 4 heroes because you need that party diversity. You really do need a thief or a character that is good at picking locks and disarming traps. If you don't have a diverse party in this game, you're going to have a bad time. For me, that does make this game hard to solo because there is a lot of bookkeeping. For me, League of Dungeoneers is a game that is best played with 4 people, each controlling one full-fledged hero. That's where I think this game shines. Okay, number 5 is the standees. I did a whole video on taking a look at the standees. I love them. They are so easy to store and to manage. If you already have a bunch of great minis, you don't even need the standees. You can just use what you have. Even if you have a whole bunch of standees, you didn't need to buy the extra standees for this game. You could use your standees from your Pathfinder Pawns or your Dungeon Universalis. I love that this game is miniatures agnostic, and I think that goes a long way in making the game feel more wide open and more expandable, and you don't need to store all kinds of minis. So that also allowed the game to come with a very extensive bestiary, which we have also taken a detailed look at. Okay, number 6 is a little bit of a negative, and that is the standee holders that the game comes with. I do not like it all. This is very nitpicky, but because I like the standees so much, and because I want them to last, I am not using the standee holders that the game comes with. They are very tight and they have these ridges in them that really does scrape up and ding up the cardboard. So I am using a completely different set of standee holders. Right now I'm using the ones from Legends of Andor because I like how softly they hold the cardboard and because they are different colors. So you can assign red bases to the enemies, you can assign gray bases to your heroes, blue bases to special enemies, and so on. And so I don't recommend using the standee holders that the game does come with. Okay, number 7. The Bestiary is amazing. I've said this before, but this is one of the best bestiaries in any dungeon crawl I've ever seen. Maybe second only to Dungeon Universalis, maybe third only to the original Warhammer Quest or something like that. It's up there. It's in like the top 3 bestiaries. There are so many monsters to fight, and because the game uses standees or because it's miniatures agnostic, it is capable of having a ton of variety. There are some issues with the powers of the monsters not having the proper rules, which I have mentioned. But again, that is going to be covered in the errata and in the FAQ, so don't worry too much about that, but it is unfortunate. But you have so many different monsters to fight, and the monsters feel different. They act differently. They have different kinds of AI. I wish the AI was maybe a little more detailed in how they actually act. I'm really looking forward to Michael, the designer, when he releases his video, his detailed video on how to handle combat, because I'm still thinking I'm getting a few things wrong in my monster AI in handling the monsters. But they are fun to fight. There are a ton of them, and I love this bestiary. It is super cool. This is such a boon to this kind of game. Okay, number 8. Number 8, the dungeon simulation part of this game is very strong. There is a good chance that you will find a lot of locked doors and locked chests, and so you will need to spend time picking locks. As you spend time in the dungeon, the threat in the dungeon increases, and so things get more dangerous. You feel that pressure, but it doesn't feel like a time limit, because from what I can tell, maybe there are some scenarios, some quests where you do need to solve the quest before a certain threat level. But from what I can tell, it just raises the pressure. It just raises the danger. And so it gives you that pressure to keep moving. But you also have opportunities to mitigate that threat, to lower the threat, so you can catch your breath and keep on exploring. If you're unable to open doors with your pick locks because your thief is suffering from a case of butterfingers, he keeps messing up, you can take those opportunities to bash down the doors, but that's going to raise the threat. And as the threat gets higher, the chances of wandering monsters coming into the dungeon gets higher. And you might reach your final objective room where you are fighting a big boss, but right down the corridor behind 3 locked doors is a wandering monster kind of slowly coming towards you. And if, he could come into that room, the wandering monster could come into that objective room at an inopportune moment and completely throw a monkey wrench in your opportunity to kill the boss. So there is a lot of good dungeon crawling adventure, and the whole dungeon crawling experience in League of Dungeoneers is excellent. I love that part of the game. Hey, it's a dungeon crawl that gets the dungeon crawling right. And that's pretty sad that can be such a rare thing. Okay, number 9, the lack of a lot of art. So this is a good and bad thing. Why is it good? It's good because in these kinds of games, art assets take up a huge portion of the budget. It is very expensive to get good art assets. Good art assets also take a lot of time. So because this game doesn't have a lot of art, they were able to keep the price down. Michael was able to deliver a whole bunch of stuff, and he was able to do it in a very timely fashion. None of the cards have any art at all. This game is really a character sheet game, so as you draw cards, you're not meant to keep them as reference like you are in something like Shadows of Brimstone, which Shadows of Brimstone has all kinds of art on all the cards because you're supposed to keep those cards and look at them frequently. In this game, when you draw a wonderful treasure, you are supposed to look at it and write down what it is on your character sheet and then put it back in the deck. So while I would always appreciate more art, I understand why the lack of art is here. There is an expansion that is going to be coming that introduces some more legendary weapons. I think there's going to be maybe like 50 or so, a 50 card deck of legendary weapons, and those will all have unique art on them. So Michael is aware that the game doesn't have a lot of art. That was part of the design decision in order to keep the price low and in order to deliver a lot on time. So while I do like a lot of art, I understand the logistics of why this game doesn't have a lot of art. So just know that going in, if you are a very art-focused gamer, you may not get a lot of appeal from the visuals of League of Dungeoneers. Okay, number 10 is the loot. The loot is pretty cool in this game. When you're first learning the game and when you're first going through a few dungeons, you might think the loot is a little limited. There aren't a ton of weapons, there aren't a ton of armor, and you might be drawing a lot of mundane weapons and armor, thinking things aren't very interesting. But as you progress through your campaign, as your characters, as your heroes progress on their journey to become great heroes, you will start to find more magical things. You will start to find scrolls that have spells that any hero can use. You will start to find power stones, and these power stones can enchant weapons and armor. They can add certain bonuses. So the magical items in League of Dungeoneers, they're more about creating your own magical item rather than finding something that somebody else already created. There are about 30 legendary items that you can find, which are very cool and bespoke, unique, created magical items. But you can also turn any item that you find into a magical item by combining it with a power stone. You can also have these charts of random magical weapons that you might find and random magical items. And then here's the chart of legendary items. So at first, the loot seems a little limited, but just keep pushing through and you will find the good stuff within those piles of treasure. Okay, point number 11. The combat is very tactical and there are a lot of strong decision points to be making in the combat. If you approach this game like you approach a game of Warhammer Quest, where you just take to the corners or take to doors and roll dice and hope for the best, you will not have a very good time. You will not survive. You need to be thinking about how you approach every single encounter in this game. You need to think about your facing. You need to think about spacing. You need to go on offensive and then know when to go on a defensive stance. There are a lot of options, and the combat is, you are kind of constantly moving around. The combat is not static. There are ways to shove enemies out of the way to make room for heroes. The enemies can shove you back to make room for more enemies. So I would say that the combat is dynamic. The combat is far more dynamic than it is in Warhammer Quest or in Shadows of Brimstone. It's maybe not quite as dynamic as Dungeon Universalis, but it's also not quite as complex. And number 12, finally, the questing is great. So I have a whole video that I released on the questing, and this is my kind of game when it comes to questing, because you will be traveling across this great overland hex map. You will be seeing this hex map on a lot of channels, I think, in other games outside of League of Dungeoneers. It's a very handy hex map for all kinds of cool fantasy games. But you will be traveling from one settlement to the other, looking for random quests, going to different quest locations, going to different quest sites, picking things up, pick up and deliver quests. You might have to go over to a dwarven city to look for a piece of armor and maybe bring it back to Whiteport, or go to Rochdale and go into the catacombs there to take care of some wandering dead, things like that. I love the quest system. There are a ton of random quests. I think I have made a whole chart here of all of the quests included in the game. There are little mini campaigns. There are some longer campaigns. There are multiple multi-level dungeons that you can go through. There are mini quests. There are side quests. There are random quests. The questing is just absolutely fantastic. This game gets questing right for those of us who appreciate this kind of dungeon crawl, this kind of random quest dungeon crawl, this kind of character character survival dungeon crawl. This is not a game like Madara or Oathsworn, where you will be reading about things that your characters do and say. You are in control of the things that your characters do in League of Dungeoneers, and that is something that I really do appreciate. So while the game does have some issues, especially in the rulebook and the errata and the needing of that errata and an FAQ to correct some pretty big errors in rules, while the game may lack some visual appeal that a lot of us look for, this is not Dungeon Degenerates. This game is not, you won't be framing this game as a work of art. It is, however, a incredibly strong foundation for a dungeon crawl and hex crawl experience that I think has a very, very exciting future ahead of it and a very exciting present. I can't, don't get me wrong. You might have some issues learning the game, but once you do, you are going to be having a lot of fun, especially if you like these kinds of very detailed games where you really want to get crunchy on controlling your party of 4 very diverse heroes and using their strengths and mitigating their weaknesses and trying to survive the treacherous catacombs and rooms of the various random dungeons and the monsters and the settlement events and the overland events, finally making your way through the campaigns, making your way down into the Southlands here, into the ancient lands where you might have to go into some of the ancient pyramids and figure out what's going on with the mummies and stuff down there. So all in all, League of Dungeoneers is an excellent game. And I think the best thing I can say about it is that this should quench the thirst of people wanting a reprint of Warhammer Quest 95. And I really can't say that about many other games, or really any other games. So, all right, guys, well, I hope you enjoyed this 12-point review of League of Dungeoneers. Now I'm going to answer some specific questions from Dungeon Dive patrons. Okay, question number 1. Is it effortless fun? No. No, it is not effortless fun. This is not one of my Dungeon Dive approved effortless fun games. This game takes a lot of effort. It takes a lot of table space. You have to get through the rules. You have to get through the issues of the rules. There's a lot of bookkeeping. There's a lot of stat keeping. It's a messy game. It's a big, epic game, and it is not effortless fun, but it is fun, and it does reward you for putting in the work. Let's see. What does League of Dungeoneers do that no other dungeon crawler does? That's a really good question. It's an interesting question. And I think the answer to that is League of Dungeoneers gets the closest to being Warhammer Quest. Closer than any other game that I know of. And so with that, it has that kind of opportunity to be that kind of big holy grail game that a lot of gamers are looking for. It has all of the things that we love about games in one box. So it's a complete package, whereas a lot of games don't feel like a complete package. What's the balance like for solo play or less than 4 player characters? You can play with fewer than 4, but I don't recommend it. I really do recommend you rolling up a full party because you need that diverse party. You need the special powers from from 4 unique professions. If you don't have a thief in your party, you're going to have a bad time. If you don't have a healer, you will struggle to survive. And so while I think some games are pretty easy to scale with some house rules, I don't recommend it. And in that, for me personally, League of Dungeoneers isn't a strong solo game. That's just me personally. It has too much going on for me to be able to get lost in the world. For me, League of Dungeoneers is best played with 3 other human players all playing full-fledged heroes. What is the options for one-shot adventures? There are actually some good options for one-shot adventures. One thing you can do is if you don't want to spend the time rolling up characters, you could play a one-shot random dungeon. Just roll up one of the random quests from Quest Book 2. There's a huge chart here that you can roll up, go on a random quest, And you could just take 4 of the pre-rolled mercenaries into a one-shot random dungeon quest and have a pretty good time. And that might be a really fun and simple way to play the game. Any immediate house rules ideas jump out? Yes, the one house rule that I want to work on, and I mentioned that in one of my videos, is there are those pre-rolled named NPC mercenaries, and I want to assign them to various settlements where those are their home settlements. And they are working in that settlement as a mercenary. And so if you want to hire that particular NPC, you might want to go to that particular settlement to find them. But they also might be out and about in the world going on their own quests. So I think there are some really good opportunities in League of Dungeoneers to create and to maintain a more persistent world. And so that's one thing I would like to see. Maybe there's ways to destroy certain settlements, like in Shadows of Brimstone, Hexcrawl, or something like that. All right, and overall longevity. This game has a great future. Even if nothing ever gets added to the game, there are probably 100 hours worth of gameplay with all of the quests and things to do in League of Dungeoneers. What is the neoprene mat for? Can it be used as a base surface table cover? No, the neoprene mat is only, I think it's like 2x2 or 2.5x2.5, something like that. And it's just this map here. So you can't use it as a table cover. It's not that big. It's just a version of this map. It is a very nice version of this map, and I actually like the printing on it better. The cardboard map is pretty dark, and it is kind of hard to pick out some of the details, and the details really do pop in that neoprene mat. How engaging is the storyline? The storyline is not. It's not that kind of game. There are some little narrative campaigns that you will play, but you are not going to turn to League of Dungeoneers to have that great pre-written story to read and to devour. This is not Oathsworn. This is not Madara. So if you're looking for an overarching campaign with a huge, interesting narrative, this is probably not the game for you. Does this make you think you might get rid of any other games as this fills the gap? No, I don't think of games in terms of when one game comes in that I really like, it replacing other games. So no, this is not going to replace any games. However, this game could, like I said, quench the thirst of those people wanting Warhammer Quest, wanting a modern Warhammer Quest. So for people like that, this game might replace Warhammer Quest. If I say that, then people might think that I'm getting rid of my Warhammer Quest stuff, but that would be kind of ridiculous. However, I do feel that if I had to sell my copy of Warhammer Quest, I wouldn't feel so bad because this does exist. Let's see. I'm interested in hearing more about the variety and immersion of the quests and campaigns that come with the game. How do they stand up against other modern dungeon crawls? If you're looking for that kind of random questing and those kind of little short story style questing, you will absolutely love this game. There are a lot of things to do. The quests they are kind of the same in that you are going into those tiles. You are building the dungeon randomly as you go. So you're not going to feel like each game is drastically different. Each quest isn't completely rewriting the rules, but certain quests do offer differences, and I think there is a good amount of variety. Can you remove previous tiles and keep track for the previous dungeon tiles on graph paper, sort of like Advanced Hero Quest if you need to? Yeah, I don't see why not. You could just draw a dungeon card and put that on graph paper. You would have to kind of abstract some of the combat, some of the tactics. Or you could, once the dungeon is finished, you could map that out on a piece of graph paper and have that be the official dungeon of certain locations. That is entirely doable, and that might be a really cool idea. I would like to see people do that. That could help to maybe make the game's world feel a little more persistent. I am interested in the topic of permanent and semi-permanent modifications a hero can acquire. What does League of Dungeoneers do in this regards? Can it easily make a character unplayable? How easy is it to recover? Yeah, so you can get cursed, you can get diseased, you can get poisoned, your armor can get completely damaged to where you have to buy new armor, your weapons can break. There are a lot of negative things that can happen to your character. You can get negative mental conditions, and you might have to go to an asylum or get prayed over by the monks in order to heal. So while there are a lot of negative things that can happen to your heroes, there are always ways to resolve those, to mitigate those. And that is that does add a lot to the idea of a persistent character, of character progression, because your characters aren't just getting better, they're also getting worn out. They are getting beat up. And so you do need to think about your overall character survival and, learn to exploit the bonuses, the strengths, but also learn how to mitigate and how to control the weaknesses. So, all right, guys, well, that was all the questions from Patron. That was the 12-point review of League of Dungeoneers. I hope you enjoyed this video, and we will talk to you later. Bye-bye.